Dawn found the little piney still and silver, the grass heavy with dew, when the dust lifted on the ridge and came toward the wagon circle like a brown curtain being pulled. Behind the plank rims, men in sweat-darkened blouses worked the new trapdoor rifles with a practiced click, thumb hinge brass, letting the rhythm push fear back down their throats. It was August 2nd, 1867, 5 miles from Fort Phil Kearny, and a woodcutting party was about to learn whether timber and nerve could hold against numbers that seemed to multiply with every heartbeat. The day before, Captain James Powell had unpinned 14 Army wagon boxes from their running gear and set them tight in an oval on a gentle knoll above the creek. Poles, tool chests, and sacks braced the gaps. Civilians, teamsters, and cutters helped stack the walls, then boiled coffee while pickets watched the high ground. Everyone knew why they were careful. The fort still lived in the shadow of Fetterman's massacre. Red Cloud's Lakota, along with Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho allies, had ridden the road and the ridges all summer, looking for mistakes they could split wide open. The wood parties were the soft spots, distance enough from the post to be tempting, yet close enough that the sound of a fight might carry back. At first light, the pickets saw silhouettes pacing the ridge, and soon the signal smokes rose. A thin line of riders showed themselves, teasing, firing, daring the soldiers to break circle and chase. Powell took one look and kept everyone low. He had fought enough to know a decoy when it wove its tail. He split his men into small teams, one shooting, one feeding cartridges, so the line would never go silent. When the first full rush came down the slope, it arrived with a tremor in the ground and a roar like a fire pulling at a chimney. The breechloaders changed everything. The Springfield Point 50-70 opened on a hinge. A man could thumb the trap, spike a fresh round, and fire before a horse crossed 30 yards. The volleys came as steady beats instead of single thunderclaps. Riders expecting the slow gulp of muzzleloaders found no pause to exploit. Horses went down in knots. Men folded behind shields and tried to swing around the ends, only to meet more muzzles. Arrows struck the planks with a dry clack, shafts trembling like insects' feelers. Bullets from old carbines clipped splinters from the rims, but the boards held. Attacks pulsed from different angles. Some warriors dismounted and came up on foot, using the land's small cups and swales the way water uses stone. A corporal at the northeast gap took an arrow through the shoulder. The teamster beside him caught the rifle as it sagged, snapped the breech, and kept the gap alive. Between rushes, canteens passed hand to hand. Powder smoke hung sweet and bitter. Someone laughed once, too loud, and then clamped it down as another whistle rolled along the ridge. Mid-morning stretched into a long, bleaching hour. The oval turned hot as a kiln. Powell walked the inside track and shifted spare rifles to whichever side grew loudest. He kept the civilians paired with soldiers and reminded them to pick targets, not horizons. A small party of riders closed to within 30 yards. One lead pony fell forward so hard its head thumped over the plank rim and thrashed there, hooves drumming the wagon box until a private shoved it back with the muzzle of his gun. The men exhaled like a bellows. Then they went back to work. Across the creek, more dust lifted, either new arrivals or the same bands trying a different seam. The defenders could not tell, so they respected every shadow. They knew if one gap crumpled, the whole circle would tear open like wet paper. The trapdoors kept stealing seconds that would have been fatal with ramrods and caps. Somewhere outside the ring, a leader, some said Crazy Horse, pointed with his quirt and sent fresh lines down. The pressure never quite broke. It only shifted, testing, learning, waiting for the circle to make a mistake. Near noon, the sound changed. Through the rattle of carbines and the sudden quiets between charges came a deeper thump, the flat punctuation of a mountain howitzer somewhere between the circle and the fort. Relief under Captain John E. Smith was coming at the double, infantry bayonets bright and the little gun jolting white bursts over the ridge. The next rush faltered. Riders swung wide to gather their wounded and drifted toward the distant dark of the hills. The men behind the wagon boxes held fire until the last shapes folded into distance, because Powell would not let a cheer pull anyone up too soon. The ground inside the barricade looked like a room no one would ever set right. Splintered planks, blackened cartridge papers, a hat brim shot through, a tin plate creased on the rim. The count of casualties went carefully. A few dead, several wounded, shockingly light for the storm they had taken. Outside the circle, the losses could only be guessed. Estimates swelled and shrank with the telling. What no one argued was the lesson. A tight barricade, a cool captain, and breech-loading rifles had turned a crowd of doomed men into survivors, waiting for help that finally arrived. Word ran along the Bozeman Trail and across the wire. That same day, far to the north near Fort C.F. Smith, haycutters behind stacked bales fought off a heavy assault with the same trapdoor rifles and the same stubborn method. The Army read the two fights as a map out of panic. Hold a small shape, make it hard, keep the line talking in brass. For the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, the day proved something too. That charging a fixed place with men who would not be drawn out was a costly bargain best reserved for softer targets. Toward evening, the wagon circle opened like a tightened fist. Men stood and felt their legs go strange. Back at the fort, saddles steamed and coffee boiled, and clerks fixed the day to paper in neat lines. Captain Powell's detachment repulsed repeated attacks by superior numbers. The report did not say how arrows sounded hitting plank, or how a wounded private gripped a teamster's hand while the surgeon's needle ticked. Those parts lived by the stove that winter and in the quiet habit of inspecting gaps before the coffee cooled. If you walk the knoll now, the trail is only a faint crease in the grass, and the little piney runs clear in a narrow cut. But the place still holds a shape. You can feel how the ground invites a circle, and how the distance to the ridge is near enough to make a man careful. The story endures because its arithmetic is honest. A handful of men chose a stubborn geometry and let patience and brass do what bravery alone could not. Help came because they lived long enough to hear it. Numbers tried to settle themselves. Powell's detachment counted 31 enlisted men and about a dozen civilians inside the oval, with a few scouts on the edges. The relief column added near 80 more. Officers estimated several hundred attackers rotating by bands, Lakota and Northern Cheyenne. Never one solid wave, but a ring that thickened and thinned. Later claims of enemy dead swelled in newspapers and shrank in reports. What stayed certain was that the circle held. The hardware mattered. The .50 to .70 Springfield threw a heavy bullet at close range, and the hinged breech let a man keep his eyes up while he worked. Misfires snapped out and were replaced. Fouling no longer froze a barrel after a dozen rounds. The barricade and the rifles did not make the men braver. They let their nerve last. In letters home, they praised the trapdoors and the wall of boards like hands on their shoulders. Red Cloud's war did not end at the wagon boxes. The Bozeman Trail closed the next year by treaty, and the Powder River country passed back under indigenous control. Yet officers kept the day as a lesson: hold a small, hard shape, pace fire, let relief do its work. The story moved from mouths to orders, and then to quiet places where wind pushes grass, and a man can still see how close the ridge lies to the creek. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.